When do you need to register your business in other states? This is important for a couple reasons. First, you want to know if you get sued in a lawsuit. You don't want a lawsuit to move forward without your knowledge, because then you lose by default. The second reason is you want to avoid penalties, taxes, and fines for not registering in a state when you were supposed to. Here's a true story. Some years ago, a business owner contacted me on the phone frantically saying he had a large amount of money frozen at a local bank. He had no idea what it had to do with. He was told that it was garnished or levied. He didn't quite understand what was going on. So as we investigated, here's what we found out. This business had been sued in one state. And then when the business owner and the company he owned never knew about it, the plaintiff won by default. So that means they got everything they asked for from the court. The court then signed a judgment. That judgment got transferred to a state where the company had a bank account, and now all that money got froze. So the question is, how could this ever happen? Well, the business was incorporated in one state, but did not register in the state where it was doing business. And so when there was a lawsuit in that state, the company never knew about it because they weren't registered there. Let me explain how that happens. When a plaintiff initiates a lawsuit, they're typically required to file the lawsuit in court and serve the lawsuit on the parties who are defendants. Serving the lawsuit means hand delivering the document to them. But what happens if you or your company doesn't have a presence in that state? For example, let's say you sell a product to somebody in Wyoming. They then go sue you in Wyoming and you're not registered there. How would they deliver that document to you? Well, one option is they could have it delivered to you in your state. But typically under state laws, the statute says if you don't register in that state, you can serve the state of Wyoming or whatever state it's in. Maybe you're serving it on the Secretary of State or some other office. But they get the legal documents on your behalf, and now you're deemed served for lawsuit purposes, even though you don't have the documents. You don't even know there's a lawsuit against you or your company. So, because you don't know, you don't respond. The plaintiff wins by default, and now that plaintiff has a judgment issued by a court. Under the United States Constitution, the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution, a judgment issued in one state is valid in every other state. So what needs to happen then is that judgment needs to be domesticated in a state where you have a bank account, and then the plaintiff, who is now considered a judgment creditor, gets to take the money out of your bank account. That is through the state garnishment and levy process. You don't have to understand all these concepts or all the legal terms I've just used. But what you do need to know is this. If you don't register in a state, you may not know about a lawsuit against you in that state. The other problem of not registering is you may be in violation of state law, and as a result, you might have fines or penalties issued by the state government. So how do you know if you need to register in a state? Well, generally speaking, the concept is if you have a significant presence there. Well, what does that mean? It means if you have a physical presence, like an office, you have an employee, you have an independent contractor, or you have sales there. Now, maybe not just one sale, but if you have a few sales, many states will consider that a significant presence. if you have any banking relationships there, or if you're required to have any sort of licenses to operate there. So as you can see, many companies actually have a number of relationships in other states. Maybe you're utilizing a vendor who's operating out of another state, a software vendor, for example. Now, practically speaking, you might be wondering, wait a second, if I use Google and I use Microsoft and I use a few other different companies, do I actually have to register in those states? Technically speaking, you might under state statute, but practically most small businesses don't. Because if there's some sort of lawsuit between you and Google, you'd probably know about it, or you and Microsoft, you'd probably know about it. But the key takeaway here is if you're not registering in those states, you run the risk of not knowing if there's a lawsuit against you in that state until it's too late. So how do you register in a state? You can register your business in each state by determining which office handles the registrations of LLCs or corporations and contacting them. Typically it lists on the website. And you would register as a foreign entity because it's foreign to that state. Your LLC is foreign to Wyoming if, for example, it's a Delaware LLC. So let's say, for example, you are operating in California, you have a Delaware corporation, and you have customers in Wyoming. So at a minimum, you'd want to register in California because you have a presence there. You already registered your corporation in Delaware, so you're covered there. You don't have to re-register. And then because you have a significant presence in Wyoming, you would need to also register there. That way, if you got sued in California, New York, or Wyoming, you would know about it because the lawsuit would be served on the state, and if it is served that way, then they'll forward it on to you. Sometimes in a lawsuit, you'll also get it sent to you directly, and that's great. So technically, you would need to register in every state where you have significant business activity. But practically speaking, that can get expensive and time-consuming because in every state, you're paying a registration fee, and you're typically having to renew that registration every single year. Now, many times that renewal is free. The fees are based on a state-to-state basis. But practically speaking, most business owners have to weigh what are the chances of getting sued versus the expense and inconvenience of registering in multiple states. So that'll be one consideration. Which states do you want to register in? And that is something you can work with your business attorney in determining. The second risk here is if you have a prominent presence in a state and you're supposed to be registered there under that state's laws, but you haven't, you may be subject to fines and penalties. And so that's another reason why whenever you have a significant presence in a state, it's valuable to have a registration in that state. So what's the takeaway here? If you have a significant presence in a state, carefully consider whether you should register your company in that state.